Good afternoon, dear friends, dear participants of Donbas Media Forum 2021. Today we will speak about the elections that were not there. Last year we have a panel discussion on elections. However, last year it was the post-election year. In 2019, we had a lot of elections. All the media were writing about that. That is why we had a lot to do. However, we don't have elections happening this year. However, the topic is very relevant, especially for Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. So I'm very happy to welcome here our esteemed guest, Yuri Moroshchenchenko, member of the Central Election Commission of Ukraine. Pavlo Kyrylenko, head of Donetsk Regional State Administration, Civil and Military Administration, Serhiy Haidai, head of Luhansk Regional State Administration, Civil and Military Administration, Olga Ivazovska, head of the board of Civil Network Opora. We also have with us editor-in-chief of Novosti Donbasa, Bogdan Karkachov, and probably we will joined online by a representative from a media outlet from Luhansk. My name is Katerina Zhemchuzhnikova. I'm a communication manager of Civil Network Opora, and today I will be moderating this discussion with our guests. To kickstart the discussion, I would like to tell you a little bit about the background of our discussion because these events are protracted in time. In 2020, we had all Ukrainian local elections, first elections which happened in the newly amalgamated territorial communities after the decentralization process on the territory of all Ukraine. However, in 18 communities in Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, the elections didn't take place because civil and military administration have submitted their requests have submitted conclusions that it is impossible to hold elections in these communities. That is why the Commission hasn't organized the elections that year. In spring, there was another attempt to hold elections, and in autumn, there was a third attempt to do that. It is necessary to say that the first attempt in 2020 was appealed in court. The decisions which was made at the beginning of 2021, when all the election process has already ended, when everything was over, when there were new mayors and local councillors elected in the communities. It was very difficult to carry out the decision of the court because though in any case the decision said that it wasn't possible to hold these elections. What are these 18 communities? These are 10 communities in Donetsk Oblast, Svitlodarsk, Toretsk, Myrne, Olgine, Volnovakha, Volgodar, Sardana, Ocheretine, Avdiivka, and Mariinka, and 8 communities in Luhansk Oblast: Yerske, Lysychansk, Popasna, Severodonetsk, which is now an acting Oblast center, Nizhnoteple, Stanitsa Luhanska, Shiroke, and Shchasta. Sorry for such a long intro, however, we all need to be on the same page to understand what we are talking about. And now I would like to give it over to Yuri and to ask you, what's your stance as a member of the Central Election Commission? We see that the situation looks like a vicious circle. You want to hold an election. There is an announcement from the military and civil administration that it is impossible to hold elections, and you as the Central Election Commission, you cannot initiate those elections. What do we do to prevent the situation from happening? Okay, so what I would like to say, for me it's a great honor to take part in this forum because the problems of Donbas, you're talking about media, communications, about trust of from the population of Donbas, especially those who lived on the non-controlled areas, are very important. For us at the Central Election Commission, it is very important. The root right of any democratic state is the right to elect their authorities. I would like to say on behalf of myself and on behalf of the Central Election Commission, on behalf of the colleagues who represent civil and military administration, those constitutional rights are the top priority to us. The elections didn't take place in those 18 communities. But it happened not because we didn't want to, or they didn't want to hold them. And you know, the Central Election Commission announced first elections in all communities using the procedure that you rightly pointed. We had this before holding elections in those communities and in general the territory of Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast, we had to ask first civil and military administrations because life, health and security of elections is the necessary precondition for holding elections, so they are free, democratic, so all people can take part and to elect their local authorities. According to this procedure, we referred the civil and military administrations. We have here both heads of Donetsk and Luhansk regional state administration. This was their responsibility. They consulted with the military, with the SBU, with the National Police of Ukraine, and based on the consultations, they provided their conclusions about the lack of opportunities to hold elections in those communities where they deemed it dangerous to hold elections. There was a resolution where those 18 communities were listed. This resolution was appealed. Well, you know, before snap elections can happen twice a year, on the last week in March and on the last week in October. And because we dropped out of the schedule of choosing local authorities before each of these dates, more than 60 years before, we reach out to the administrations. We try to understand whether the situation has changed, whether we can hold elections, and if there is such opportunity, then of course we can launch the election process. Unfortunately, each time we reached out to the administration, they told us that it was impossible. We needed to provide full-scale analysis on the local and national level. We reached out to the central bodies such as SBU or other law enforcement agencies which were present locally, to the central office, to the headquarters, law enforcement, the Council of National Security, Safety and Security, to the National Police of Ukraine, so they also can take part in analysis and get the conclusion that it is impossible to hold elections in those communities. Let me be honest, as for the legal part of this question, I would stop at that, because we did everything and it was necessitated by the procedure. We did our best. We understand that before we have positive conclusions from the civil and military administration, we won't be able to provide local population the opportunity to elect their councillors and mayors. So I want to ask a tricky question. Do you think that the responsibility is on the shoulders solely on the SBU, RNBO and representatives of civil and military administrations? Well, you see, I consider that the responsibility in a democratic state is on all institutions. It's different. Each institution has its own scope of responsibility. As you know, we have several branches of power in Ukraine, and each of the branches has its own scope of responsibilities, and it becomes the precondition for future work. The analysis of the civil and military administration became the precondition for us to make a decision. By answering to your provocative question, I would like to say that I think that we will discuss this later. We were asked this question many times, why they were allowed to elect the president, the MPs of the Verkhovna Rada, and they couldn't elect local authorities which would directly manage the local communities. So thank you so much for your question. In this context, in public discussions, in letters to the Parliament of Ukraine, using decisions of the appeal court, of the Court of Appeal, that said that we need to hold elections. However, this decision was put to a halt, brought to a halt. We used criteria because otherwise for the head of the administrations it would be like a beacon, because they asked the law enforcement said no, it's impossible to hold elections, and they answered us. However, if we have a clear criteria, we will be able to hold elections, because we cannot hold elections without state procedure, without proper criteria. It's not our whim, it's just what we need to do. There is a procedure that needs to be sustained, because we are a democratic country, we have rule of the law. So we have what we have. We hope that for the next year, last week in March 2022, the situation will be better. And me, as coordinator of Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast, I even prepared a resolution, a draft resolution for Donbas. However, we received the decision of the court, of the Supreme Court of Ukraine, that stopped the decision of the Court of Appeal. That is why we have to postpone elections once again. Probably my colleagues will add something to what I said. We will get back to the question of criteria and media. It is important that people understand what is happening. Thank you so much. In our audience, we have participants who will be able to ask questions in the Q&A session. First, we have a round of speeches from each and every participant. Now, I would like to reach out to representatives of the local communities who know really well what is happening on the ground. So, I have quite tricky questions, provocative questions to you. When do you think this situation might change? What might lead to this change? And there is a series of counter arguments why elections are not held. The first is related to safety and security, and second is related to economic conditions. It is better to have civil and military administration because it is easier to budget those processes in those cities, villages, and other communities. So, how justified are these points? How do you think? Thank you so much for your question. I welcome all participants who are present in the studio and who watch us online. I can start with answering your last question, which is related to the budgeting processes from the civil and military administration. Civil and military administration undertake the responsibilities to they undertake the responsibilities of the community councils, which were there before the creation of the military and civil administration. The responsibility is on the shoulders of the head of civil and military administration. The only thing that changes is the procedure. As for the simplified budgeting, it is directly proportionate to increasing of the responsibility. Budgeting is not only about making decisions at the local level at allocation of budget costs. However, I think that this is complete bullshit. I'm sorry for this word, that there is corruption in the civil and military administration because they have direct access to budget. That's not what's happening. Budget is controlled. It is the responsibility of the head of the civil and military administration, and not by collective lack of responsibility. I understand very well how it shall be according to the legal framework. I know who is responsible for distributing that money. I know that local that MPs might vote for something. I have investigated several times during situation when I ask a local councillor why you voted for this or that particular act. In this case, the head of the civil and military administration has direct responsibility for all the actions taken. We have 10 civil and military administrations along the contact line, which are close to the front line, depending on the area that they occupy. So in this case, uh, we often make faster decisions. It is necessary to make those faster decisions, and of course, we can easily make those decisions thanks to the mandate that heads of the civil and military administration have, on top of the law on local government, where they act based on the law on civil and military administrations. As for how this decision was made, Yuri clearly said how this procedure was going on. As for the dates, I remember that it was on the 8th August 2020, then on the 12th of January 2021.
21st of the August 2021, and the procedure is still the same. The request of the Central Executive Commission and conclusions. The conclusions of the heads of the military and civil administrations, before which there was the common meeting with managers of the authorized bodies, who provided their own decisions, their vision on every function or direction of their work, on if possible or not possible to hold elections. And such conclusions and visions, that it wasn't subjective, but it was provided statistics on the number of wounded or shellings or military, and I'm ready to answer all of your questions. I have another provocative question for you. The question is the following. In Slovyansk, the elections took place in 2020, but then the civil and military administration was appointed a year later. So does it mean that they also had to include the Slavensk into that list? You are right that in the beginning of the discussion, elections were not held in 18 civil and military administrations of Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast. Now, on the territory of Donetsk Oblast, there are 11 military civil administrations where elections in 10 of them were not held, and one of it were held. The head was selected. The composition of the deputies corpus was created, and then there's blocking. Introduction of this civil and military administration in Slaviansk didn't happen on the basis of the safety components. It's a different situation. Introduction was made based on Article 3 of the law on the civil and military administration, when the people deputies did not fulfill their obligations. There's the court's decision about this. But when the city mayor of Slaviansk was selected in the second tour, and he already got his powers in December 2020, and I every month, I have the applications of in the framework of 1/12 of the budget. The budget is blocked. The making the key decisions of development of the city was under question as well, and this happened until 26th of May 2021, when, on the basis of non-fulfillment by the people's deputies their powers, there's a norm envisaged in the law on the civil and military administration. On the basis of this, this administration was introduced. military civil administration was introduced, in which, not on the basis of the safety components, elections will be held on the decision of the Central Electoral Commission. And elections take place either last week of September or last week of October. Thank you. Now I have a question for you. It's also provocative. I hope you can give us an interesting reply. In Luhansk, there are several communities where elections didn't happen, and some of them are small. For example, Popasna, we always hear about the information from the front line, but Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, where there's a peaceful life happening, but elections were not appointed there. So in what way? It's a big community. Severodonetsk is now fulfilling duties of the Oblast Center now. So what are the main safety criteria there if the rest of social activity of the community can be held there? Children can go to school, but elections no. I will then divide my reply into several blocks. First of all, you always say, I'm asking you provocative questions, but they are everyday questions for us. They are routine questions for us. We live in conditions of constant provocations, something like this. Secondly, as for how children go to school, and how do they do it in Zolota 4? It's where I was officially introduced by the president, Volodymyr Zelensky. They go to school under the shelling. But you introduced that, then it's probably possible. And then when I was introduced, we heard shelling on the right and on the left. And almost every day, I now unfortunately get in references about those shellings. And we know how on Shastia mines were thrown on it. And it's a surprise it was thrown from drones, and it's a miracle nobody got hurt, because when the first mines went off, there were 30 people standing near the hostel. As for the so-called peaceful cities or towns, what do you know about the Russian drone Karlan? Well, most importantly for you to know about it. What do you know about Selitra? That is based on nitrogen in tens of tons. It's a kind of a liquid that exploded in Beirut, and we all saw what happened with Beirut. And in Severodonetsk, it's 3 times more of it than Beirut. So you moving away from the topic of elections. No, you touched upon the topic of the peaceful towns. But well, what do you know about trying to do explosion in the hospital, military hospital? And do you know that the ground thrower was stopped also near to the vessel with the nitrogen? There are some examples among our militaries. And I suppose there is such a difficult situation. So on account, by the way, some big activity of people when they say that freedom of speech or democracy were like taken away from them. Frankly speaking, I haven't seen these people on the front line helping our military to correct to operate the machine gun or helping in the hospitals or something like this. And maybe they could give some advice for example, measure temperature with the electronic thermometer. Well, tips like this. And as for economics, at the end, you just take a look at the dry statistics. in kilometers, in the number of repaired stadiums, schools, centers, service centers, kindergartens, hospitals. I can give you a big list. And if you compare everything that was 10 years done, I'm speaking about my oblast, and what has been done for these 2 years, believe me that if to put it on scales, for 2 years, they will overweight what's been done for the past 10 years on the number of works that was done. And as for responsibility of the military and civil administrations, I completely agree with my colleague, because responsibility is on the one person, on the manager of this administration, when some decisions are to be made. Because indeed, there is no team responsibility, no collective responsibility, and you can't point out your finger at anyone. There's clear decision by one man, and it doesn't matter if it's Nizhny Tepla or Счастье or Severnetsk or Lysychansk. There's a man who bears responsibility. Ola, I want to talk to you, but not to be blamed, since we are both from Opora, and so that nobody thinks that this could be, some kind of a setup. So I'm asking this question for you. People, when the military and civil administration are created, people get some benefits. Maybe don't need that self-government. And hypothetically speaking, they do have some safety questions on the election. So you, as a head of the organization that works on the development of the criteria that can be suggested to define these safety criteria for appointment of elections, you always say that it has to be done and that these elections have to be appointed, but are they really necessary there? I think that none of us who's present here today cannot substitute the Constitution or the General Declaration of Human Rights. Constitution defines that the source of power is the population, and doesn't delegate to the managers of oblast administrations, any kind of administration, the representative function. If the people don't have the powers to delegate via self-government bodies to manage properly these territories, the effective managers, local heads, mayors, which is secondary, because with all my respect, I know that many roads were built and infrastructure has been improved, but nevertheless, nobody has a right or authority to speak about constitutional democracy with arrogance. That's how all authoritative mode starts, because there are smart people and there are stupid people, and there are wise people who define that somehow they are more effective managers, but people didn't delegate these representative functions to them. So speaking frankly, when we mention 18 communities, we understand well it's not about 18 elections in the perspective, because all these communities have different situations. But now I'm extrapolating the situation to emotions to 2015 in Mariupol, where they also had to define whether it was going to be self-government or this administration. We also heard shellings from the city, and in the city there was the heavy equipment on the day of elections or voting. Separate political groups, under very patriotic mottos, considered that the elections shouldn't take place. They made provocations, they destroyed the bulletins, or they broke through to the printer houses where they were issued. But they have a lobby, and lobby is Akhmetov, is big business, unlike small towns where there is no such lobby. This town got local self-government. Go to Mariupol, if it's bad or good, if they shoot there or not. You know that the distance from the contact line, so in fact it's closer than to the 18 communities we are talking about today. So if you, Serhiy, say that, do you know? But the problem is that we don't know, because the society does not have access to the information that should have been added to the letters in which you sent your conclusions to the Central Electoral Commission so that the society had the understanding that you operate a bigger list of data. But when you say whether it is needed or not, I have worked in Minsk for 2 years. I'm no diplomat, but I think that all people of goodwill who have the understanding of certain political processes, peace building, and so on, they are to join it. And if you think that the public cannot express their opinion because they don't know about the salitra in the volumes and the risks, well, it's this information is to be published, actually, made public. It's not, and then all of it is it's not a secret information. The problem is, or it's not classified. But there is a matter of war, and there's the question that goes after the question of war. Nobody lies as much, as the classics would say, as after the fishing, during the war, or before elections. There are two factors that coincided. Elections should take place in the framework defined by the law, and I hope this spring, because I can bet you, I can make a bet, the next parliamentary elections on these territories will take place, but the fact itself of voting will be held there, despite the difference for today and 2019. The parliamentary elections in July is very insignificant. Summing up, I think we cannot just state the fact of the problem. We are to go together to solve it where it's possible, because it's safe and we respect our citizens equally, and we don't think that the head or of some council or the mayor or the president has to have a wider circle of powers to define who is more important people. Or and others, a draft document that has been sent to the OSCE and the Venice Commission, because we have been discussing criteria all year long, but no one saw them.
These criteria need to be measured. There is green zone, there is yellow zone and green zone. So the same shall be related to the security issues, not length in kilometers, not some kind of a secret information. However, there shall be clear criteria to define the level of safety and security. In December, this group will provide conclusions. So there will be some kind of responsibility of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, because there will be requirements to the documents provided by the civil and military administration, because based on these, the State Election Commission will have to make decision based on that. I'm sorry for taking too much time, however, it happened even during the previous discussion. Well, you understand that you don't have the right to carry out investigative actions. You were talking about the local government, local councillors. There are different branches of power with different functions. As for the local councillors, this is not the function of the head of the civil and military administration. You told it yourself. So let me finish, please. After evaluating this draft law, we really want to have a visit with the MPs from the Profile Committee of the Verkhovna Rada to both regions, to visit the selected communities, to meet local stakeholders. I hope that heads and representatives of the local and civil military administration won't only provide the facts, but will also engage in dialogue, because it must happen with the interest of the community in mind, because if it's not ready, it is impossible to hold election there. However, we'll need to know the facts to make an informed decision on whether not to hold or not hold elections. I hear a lot of opinions, however, all of them are related to humanitarian dimension, not to security dimension. I remember your progress on Suspilna when you said that there's not enough food for local kindergartens, but it's not due to the war, it's due to inefficient management at the local level. I'm sorry for being too emotional. However, since 2015, our organization have carried out a dialogue in relation to IDPs. we suggested different decisions to have a special provision in the law which would describe the procedure. Many people said that no, it's impossible. These wrong people, they will vote for someone awful. However, it doesn't work like this. We need to let these people the opportunity to hold elections. As an IDP who exercised my right to vote, I'm really grateful to you for this initiative. So I will give you the opportunity to answer to what Olha has said. Well, first, probably you didn't listen to me attentively about the investigative actions. I can explain you that I have carried out a lot of investigative actions when I worked for 11 years in the prosecutor's office. I have carried out these actions with employees of the Verkhovna Rada. If you understood me as I was carrying out investigations as the head of the civil and military administration, so that's completely wrong. Otherwise, I wouldn't be part of this discussion. But I have carried out a lot of actions like this when I had the relevant mandate. Because you misunderstood me. It was said in a context when I understand who is responsible for which. So I don't want you to think that I'm trying to justify myself. I just want to say that I know who is responsible for different issues. That is why I tell you about this collective lack of responsibility, where each person might say that I was told to do so or so. I'm telling you how it was in practice, in real life. When you ask a similar question to a person who knows for sure that, for example, they have the mandate to take this or that decision, it doesn't have a direct connection to whether elections shall or shall not be held. So I just wanted to explain what I said about investigative actions, and I hope that I explained it to you. As for the access to information, I fully agree with you that they need to have access to more public information. However, this access cannot be based without taking into account for professional use, without taking into account the law of Ukraine on state secret. I don't want to distort your information related to the fact that the law enforcement provided this information. So first, the information related to the this thing, it was provided by the Joint Forces Operation Headquarters because they have direct access to the information related to the military action. They have full information. I don't have access to this information that they have. May I add to that? We are talking about elections, right? Elections in Donetsk and Luhansk and Kharkiv Oblast. So I feel tension in our studio. That's a too vivid discussion, and I think this situation is quite natural because in I'm very honest opponent to my colleagues who represent civil and military administration about elections in these 18 communities. I call them very often. We talk very often. This dialogue is not that easy, but I can mm, tell you that Oleg and Sergei, they really helped us carry out election campaigns. For example, with Pavlo, we had a situation when we couldn't find a facility for the election committee. So the same was with Sergei. They help us a lot. Olga, I understand what you're talking about. Democracy is about a clear following all the provisions of the Constitution of Ukraine. And those collective authorities, whether they are responsible or not, cannot be limited in their responsibilities according to the legal framework. However, I would like us not to try to put a blame on the opponent. I want all us to do our best so these elections are held. Many people asked why these two governors don't let you hold elections. Why? So, what's your answer to this question? We, as lawyers, know qui prodis, who will benefit from this. Uh, because you think that for the governor it's not beneficial that elections are held in this community and in others not. No, that's not true. It cannot happen. There is a deeper thing to that. It's not about emotions. It's not about their desire to obstruct this process. There are conditions which force them to make this decision and decision not to hold these elections. On the other hand, we need to see ourselves in the shoes of the heads of local administrations. They get together law enforcement and they provide their expert opinion on whether elections can be held or cannot be held. What civil and military administration shall say? We ignore the position of the local enforcement, of the law enforcement. We ignore the position of the National Security Service of Ukraine or the National Police of Ukraine. So we are on the same page. We This is exactly what Ola has said. We need communication. We need this forum. We need this dialogue. We are all for saving lives of people when they go to vote. People must understand that they were not provided this opportunity to cast their vote because there was a clear danger to them. We need to unite our forces. We need to unite our efforts because this is a challenge to us, to the Central Election Commission. A lot of MPs reach out to us, and it is also a challenge to you because you are directly blamed. This is a challenge to all the civil society because it cannot indifferently see the situation when constitutional rights are not protected to elect public authorities and where there are no arguments proving that there is a real danger. Bogdan, chief editor of Novosti Donbas, and with whom we have with us Anna Nikolaenko, chief editor of TV channel Irta, which is located in Severodonetsk. So, Bogdan, other colleagues said about the lack of communication, about problems which stem because of that the lack of criteria based on which decisions are made about uh, the decision to hold elections. You, as journalists, as editors who write about events in Donbas, you face this situation every day. Do you think is it a threat to the level of confidence of the local population? How do you think they feel this feedback? Do they, because they want to have local government and they are not fully explained why they cannot have it? Yes, for the part of the local population that we talk to, they do feel that the situation is unfair. This fact that the elections were not held are used by opponents from different political camps. They speculate, they manipulate using this topic. In those areas where elections were not held, that is why I think it would be right to have better communication, at least in part of those communities. And I think it would be necessary to hold elections at least partly in those communities where it is possible. What you can do so people can convey their position, their stance to the civil and military administration, to representatives of the Central Election Commission. I think that we all have to pay more attention to this, not only during the pre-election and election period, but all year round, because there is a lack of such information in the media. Why do you think there is this lack of information? That's because journalists don't have enough access to the speakers, because we know that we have speakers among us, they are ready to speak openly. So what's the reason behind this lack of information? Usually heads of the civil military administrations, they are based on the decisions of the law enforcement, and the law enforcement doesn't always explain the criteria. They only provide hard answers to why these elections cannot be held. That is why it's very difficult to get in touch with the law enforcement agencies or the civil and military administrations. And now I would like to give it over to Anna Nikolayenko. She's here with us via Zoom. Anna, thank you for joining us. You, as a person who lives in one of those communities where elections were not held in Severodonetsk, as a journalist who works with this topic. So, what do you think about what is happening to communication on this topic? What prevents all of us to explain those people why elections were not held, and what prevents people from the regions to convey their position why they need local government? Well, if you let me, I will start from my personal opinion as a person who lives in Luhansk Oblast, in the community where elections were not held. That's true. The constitutional people have this constitutional right, which was removed from them, but it's temporary, and we need to take a look at the situation from two sides. So the same as with vaccination against COVID, the two sides have their own opinion, and partly that they are right. There are different pros and cons of vaccination. The same is with holding election. As a journalist, I need to be neutral. However, as an inhabitant of Severodonetsk, I would like to say that I'm for postponing holding elections here. Well, there is a unique terror threat, in my opinion. I don't want some kind of Boyko, Murayev, and other people who are very corrupted to take power over in these communities. I see that in a neighboring community, people elected a person who was part in organizing Russian Spring in Donbas.
I think it's a terroristic threat. To me, as a Ukrainian, it is. So it's such events that can happen. So here I support, you know, postponing the elections. As for constitution, I will repeat myself. They did deprive us of expressing our will, but the notion itself of constitution, it's something that is used by politicians who just were moved away from the feeder. So they just organize some meetings. They're using their bots in social media, add some oil to the fire, and from time to time trying to get a wave of dissatisfaction in the communities where elections didn't happen. And moving to my professional activity, to my journalistic work, what I am observing in the communities, what I observe in the society, is that our people are so tired from the lockdown, they don't care for elections anymore. Maybe it's my subjective point of view, but I collect ideas of my colleagues, systemize them somehow. I don't know any, person from here who has filed a lawsuit against violation of his constitutional rights. If there is some meeting, yes, people are standing there, but they forget about elections because they have other things to care about. I have another clarification, but in what way does your channel highlight this problem? To full extent, or should you just go to, or do you only highlight it before the elections? No, we monitor the decisions of the Central Electoral Commission, of our politicians, officials. We highlight, we tell the community. We actually broadcast to all the territory of the Luhansk Oblast. We do it not only before the elections, it's our conscious citizen position, and we always tell people about the electoral process. But going back to the previous thesis of mine, the people are just not very curious anymore. to have elections, because I upload videos on YouTube and I see the number of views. Even if I use some bombastic, title for the video, maybe you can have a couple of hundreds of views, but people just don't find it interesting. We try to involve experts to our materials on the electoral process, but who are our experts? Even if there is some lawyer, then he will have to do something to do with some top politician who has something to do with the electoral process. And can we show this his opinion as the expert opinion? Probably not, because he's somehow engaged and cannot be biased. So there are experts in many areas who say they are experts, but they're not. There's just some commentators. Okay, thank you, Anna. Right now, I would like to go back to the topic of the criteria, but first I would like to ask our audience in the present journalists here questions. If so, please give me a sign. Oh, we always have questions. So give me the microphone, please. Alexei Matsuka, organizing committee of the DMF. I have a question on account of the existing of the civil military administration. Isn't it the ground for why the elections are not held in the amalgamated communities? Because if we hold elections there, then they will be obliged to get rid of the military civil administrations. How is this thing regulated? Because we can't quite understand where the collision is. If there is the Central Electoral Commission, then what's going to happen to it then if we hold elections? Okay, let's speak about such a thing that somehow nobody has spoken about yet. When the notion of the military civil administration has been introduced, when the military armed aggression of Russian Federation started, when the war started, somehow they forget about the war, especially those people who discuss certain things. The thing is, it's the thing that I have already told. I somehow don't see that there was a communication with the military on expression of will of some soldier who is standing a meter on the left or meter on the left or meter on the right on his position. We are at war. People die. Today, for several hours ago, another time, the region of Shastya has been shelled, and the electric supply was cut out, and the water supply, and they have just restored working of the single checkpoint. It's Donetsk and Luhansk. Somehow we don't talk about this. We remember how the wonderful elections were held in Crimea. There was the expression of will of people. Do we agree with it now? Or do you mean the referendum? Why not election? Okay, but the Russian Federation thinks that it was the elections. We know what it was. We understand it. We saw it with our own eyes. Those, green men who were at first who? Some guard. Yes, a civilian guard. And then they told the entire world that it was their special forces, right? But let's not confuse it with the, current democratic terms. No, we are not. So one more time, in Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, there's war, and unfortunately our positions are shelled every day. Our settlements are shelled every day. Unfortunately, people still die here, and we have many wounded every day, and we indeed have war going on there. It's not on paper or in some imaginary world. Anya Nikolaenko, she had when she expressed her opinion, I understand her, because I see another war, a war for vaccination, and I see the results. The results as look like overcrowded hospitals. Okay, given this question is very important, you raised the topic of Crimea. Sorry for emotional way. You don't look emotional. Well, first of all, the civil Netskopura was the applicant in 2016, and later, when in the Russian Federation the elections took place on Crimea, because admitting the OSCE elections in Russia included the Crimean territory together with the voters and districts and candidates who participated and mandates that were played there into the report. And trust me, there was no sign of democratic process there or the referendum. There's an expert evaluation and speeches on the international platforms. If I may, please let me finish. But you cannot compare the territory that are controlled by the government of Ukraine with the non-controlled territories. It's the same thing to recognize that Ukraine is incapable to provide security of its citizens in those communities where there are no active hostilities, but the possibility of some explosions, arsons, or other measures. So correspondingly, if it is so dangerous to live in this community, maybe you have to warn the citizens that they can't go to schools, that they can't visit hospitals, and so on. The problem is that on the number of communities, there's only political reason, and everybody knows about it, including the present experts. And unfortunately, the journalist who has spoken up, she has the right for her personal opinion, and I respect her a lot. But her arguments that she voiced there only in the political sphere, and you cannot replace it with the other notions, because today you are patriots who are in powers, you are motivated, you work well with the budget, with the management of the territory, but tomorrow after this another authority shall come, but they will use these methods but against other type of population or in a different way. And this is the biggest problem, because the wise population cannot be substituted for goodwill of people. So first of all, comparing elections that don't take place in the communities where they can take place with Crimea or some occupied territories of Donbas, you are recognizing incapability of the state and irresponsibility of the state there. Because if we say that those territories are occupied, then jurisdiction there on the efficient control is whose? Not of Ukraine. When we manage the territory that is 100% under control of Ukraine, they are to be provided with all the least of the basic possible rights for citizens, population, services, and so on. If we grant civil services but take away political rights, so there's a question whether after the civil services there's reference information on the hostilities from. Unfortunately not. And you are smiling, but you know it well. Everybody who's following this media forum, they also know this information, and it is a big problem you have to deal with dignity. And you can do it only in one hand. You have to define the criteria, the list of criteria. The society is to be informed as what is happening in the criminal situation. If there are crimes connected with the armed conflict, because we know there are many other crimes, just like in many other communities, including Kiev. If the regular civil infrastructure is functioning, if it is functioning, then is it in the question of whether it's possible to open school to do the voting and do the proper electoral process. Regional councils, where are they now? Aren't they in separate buildings? Where on the territory of those communities where you cannot hold elections, but they're functioning there. So the selected regional councils in the regions separately from Luhansk, they are in the buildings where, or in those communities where politicians cannot function or hold elections. So you have to be honest from the point of view of risks, and risks is concentration of responsibility on the political groups that further on shall bear political responsibility for any failures, and it's not division of the branches of power. Armed conflict is not a secret for anyone. Thank you, Olha. You led us to discussing criteria. Maybe you can take and give us a few words on your vision of the criteria, what they should look like, not to have this misunderstanding of miscommunication when people are either willing or not willing to have elections in their community when we cannot provide it. Which criteria are to be publicly voiced and made available for the big circle of people. So as far as I understand, Olga has seen this draft law with the list of this criteria, right? A group of criteria. It's hard for me to comment on it. Criteria per which the safety component was decided, I can tell you for sure that those were not criminogenic general situation in those communities where elections didn't take place. I completely agree with you. What does it have to do with the everyday all categories of crimes which are committed on any territory of our state? Main criteria are its military actions and those threats and its probability of these threats for holding or not holding elections. Can I understand? I'm just answering this question at the same time I'm posing a question if I can do this, because I indeed did not see the draft law. And who did they develop these criteria with the military aspects, foreign European states, or did they involve military practitioners, who are the participants of the war? It's the blocks of criteria and something that refers to the military area, to the safety, as together with the due to the armed conflict on Ukraine, they are to define. So there's a procedure of the Security Council of Ukraine. So it's on the stage of preparation. Yes, the draft law sets the framework, deadline, terms, responsible parties, and the Security Council is to give the list of clear criteria and requirements to the documents, analytics that you collect, and you give your conclusion to the Central Electoral Commission. So the criteria to be developed by the Security Council of Ukraine,
because it accumulates all the law enforcement agencies. Of course, the civilians cannot do that themselves. As for these criteria, there is a concrete list of criteria, concrete responsibilities. So I understand you now. So we will be able to approach this issue to see who is responsible for a concrete criteria, if it will be stipulated in the law. As for you has said about situation in the regions, no one says that life has stopped there. What kind of life it is, what kind of security it is, that's another question. Well, in some areas, if we take a look at some of the areas such as Volnovakha Council in general, on the territory where elections were held, where Volnovakha civil military administration exists. However, in this region, there is Myrnenska civil military administration, where some of the position of the forces were held, where there were shellings of Granitne settlement where children go into school or where elections were not held. As for the criteria, I fully agree with you. Let's define the criteria and let's move towards meeting them. I have organized different meetings there. I invited Sergei, I invited other people to take part in it because we need to hold them all together. Personally, I heard information provided there. All of us, participants of those meetings, have access to confidential information. So we have special access to that, to this confidential information. Why I'm telling that? When these meetings were held, there were conclusions made after each of such meeting. There were conclusions provided by the law enforcement agencies. As for the criteria whether they will be public, we need to stipulate that in the law, because we will also have to provide conclusions. Thank you so much for telling that. You're talking about criteria. These criteria were not made public. They are now being developed. Bogdan, over to you. I'm always ready. Once again, you see, I absolutely agree with content of the speech by Olga. Why? Because democracy, some people might dislike democracy. Democracy even might be not the most efficient way to manage public life. However, this is the form of government that we chose, and because we chose it, each authority has its own responsibility and mandate. We are in the same boat because the most important resource of each branch of authority, I represent. I represent the Central Election Commission. Olga represents the civil society, which takes part in implementing those rights and exercising those rights. However, we are in the same boat because confidence, this is the foundation we all act upon. I like the key message by Olga. The most important what is killed during this process of solving this problem is confidence. When people don't know, they don't trust, and that's the root problem. Not because we or you are corrupted, because you want to let some people come into power or not. I disagree with our colleague from Severodonetsk who says, well, as a journalist, she really says that these politicians are bad. We won't let them take the power. So it's better that those good politicians rule over. We don't need to have elections. But it's not democracy. This is not the argument that we would like to use in our communication strategy. Our communication strategy is the number one challenge. In order to have this strategy, we need to take a couple of steps. First, to draft an action plan. I think we need to have this action plan on how to take control over the occupied area. We need to have this action plan on how everyone must act. We don't say that regional administrations haven't organized those elections because most of these regions are controlled by the terrorists. We did our best. We held elections to Rayon district councils. And here I would like to say thank you to our colleagues who represent the civil and military administrations. Otherwise, we won't be able to hold elections in some of the communities if both governors were very active, because there were a lot of problems. We are really grateful to all those people who made part of the territorial election commissions. We only provided certificates to those people to thank them because they worked 24/7. That's true. But another part of the truth is that that we cannot say that there is something important that we won't tell you about. In this case, we will lose the trust of the society. If we are talking about the reintegration of Donbas, those who live on the non-governmental controlled territories, for them it is important to show that Ukraine is the state that welcomes them. This is their motherland where they are equal in rights. They will be able to elect authorities. Their needs are met. Their representatives will take part in implementing decisions at the regional or district level and local level. They will be implementing those decisions which uh, would be made by their direct representatives. So today we have a general strategy. We need a communication strategy. I would like to jump on this opportunity to say to heads of Donetsk and Luhansk civil administrations, please do create a working group who would be responsible for communication. I am ready to be your partner from the Central Election Commission to help you. Katerina, you're talking about criteria. Why we are not ready to list those criteria? Because there is an actor that needs to summarize all positions of the experts engaged in this process. Even in the draft law, which was mentioned by Ola, it doesn't stipulate the criteria. It also stipulates the requirements to those criteria and dates. If we take a look at this, the main criteria that we shall have is for everyone to be able to elect their representatives in safety and security without feeling of interference from other people. So these elections are fair and just. This is the one and only criteria that we can evaluate the possibility or impossibility of holding elections. We need to hold elections or not to hold elections because we want to do so. This is the requirement of the Constitution. We are obliged to do so. If people can come and vote, they need to come and vote. If people cannot cast a vote because it is a threat to their life and health, it seems to me that Serhiy has told about it when he mentioned ammonium nitrate, and another representative said when he mentioned these reconnaissance and sabotage groups, we need to demonstrate whether the situation is safe and secure. The society must understand that this decision was made not because they don't want to hold elections, but because it is a direct threat to my life, to the life of my family, to the life of my children, to my neighbors. And this is the only precondition, this is the only threat which prevents us from holding elections. All the rest is subjective, it's politics, but it's not constitutional when we are speaking of implementation of the rights to vote. As a moderator, I would like to say that you listed the right criteria. However, the way I heard it about that it is impossible to falsify protocols, that people need to cast their vote. So using this principle, then probably elections in Kharkiv shouldn't been there, because we know that there are a lot of violations of the election rules and there are information attacks to observers. What I wanted to say is that context is important. The security, life and health, this is our utmost priority. Article 205 of the Election Code of Ukraine says that the Central Election Committee can delay or put to hold elections out of preconditions related to threats to health and life. Thank you so much for clarifying that, because we need to be on the same page, because I see that Ola is looking at me. I understand. I wanted to tell it to you based on the security and not on the basis of political risks, which are always there. I would like the situation not to be normalized. I don't want us to get used with the situation where we cannot hold election there for the past 2 years. I don't want it to be a precedent, because we have this long border with Russia, which is not only limited by Donbas, also Chernihiv and Donbas and Kharkiv regions are also on the border in Russia, and there also might be some problems. So I hope that there won't be situations when they wouldn't like to hold elections there in these new regions. So this is about a clear understanding of the criteria. That is why this criteria must be public, because everyone must understand why elections are not held. Do you want to add anything? Maybe there are questions from our audience. I only have one question. I could read out all the questions. Do you have any questions in the audience? If there are no questions, I would like to ask all participants, or some of them, to explain their stance. When there were elections to the State Duma of the Russian Federation several months ago, they also happened on the non-controlled areas of Ukraine where people could vote through internet, and we don't know whether it was real or fake of the Russian propaganda. We don't know what really happened. Probably Ola, as a representative of an observing organization, can comment on that. I can start answering. Well, for us, these elections were not there. They simply don't exist. From the point of view of the Ukrainian state, these elections were not there. And I could stop at that if we were not talking about communication, media forum. We cannot limit ourselves with purely legal violations or legal conditions. Let me reiterate, it is very important to us to shape, to draft our media strategy and to define the role of each and every institution within this strategy, to give clear, unified, joint and easy to understand messages for our citizens who live on the territories which are not controlled by the government of Ukraine. We need to tell them that they are citizens of Ukraine. Ukraine is your home. Ukraine is your motherland. You need to cast your vote in Ukraine. Your future is in Ukraine, and you need to do your best for Ukraine to recover control, to regain control on these territories. Consequently, we don't only need to tell about that, we need to put that into action. For example, to hold elections in 18 communities.
But we don't know, you are ensuring me. Yes, yeah, you're right. As an example, that Ukraine, for maximum, making efforts to implement all rights. And now we speak about electoral rights, there are social rights, educational rights. There's a number of measures that we are to take, but to speak and discuss and in some way admit those elections which take place on the territory of Ukraine in the parliament of another country, we cannot, facilitate it or support it. Of course, we cannot facilitate it, but I think it's a dangerous precedent, even more dangerous than Crimea currently, because 610 citizens who got Russian passports, they have become the tool in hands of Russian Federation for the potential open mass aggression on the territory of Ukraine. You know very well that in the framework of the referendum held online, I would suggest the government of Ukraine not to use the experience of the Russian Federation. We had big amendments to the constitution, and the citizens of Russian Federation, where they are, there is the territory of Russian Federation. Russia thinks that they have legal right and they are authorized to take some aggressive measures in order to protect their own citizens, so to say. That's why for Ukraine it's very dangerous. Online voting is a method, a tool to bring in Ukrainian citizens who got passports of Russian Federation but didn't quit the citizenship of Ukraine, to become the door, the entrance to the territory of formally on the territory of Ukraine, Russian the official order, not only for effective control as defined by the international law as the definition, but physically. So here I completely agree. Summing up, the state of Ukraine, authorities of local self-governments, they are to be effective, act in the legal way, and to be open to show how much we differ or how much we are different from Russians, not ethnically speaking, but as methods and form of society management. So we are to quit this I think that the representatives of both civil military administrations, I don't mean heads right now, but I know that you participate in the discussion in the framework of the Committee of Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine of the separate measure, and we all had a consensus on a clear procedure, responsible parties, not for it to be formal but fact, and to gather good quality information that can be verified by the third party, for example, Security Council of Ukraine, because it's important to have the situation when the parties that make the decisions, they have a conflict of interest with the final solution, so that the society doesn't blame anyone. There must be a good legal definition and regulation, because we have now, it has been established in 2015 when the contact line wasn't defined, when it was moving, and at elections of 2015, I remember well, we demanded via Security Council, and under the Prime Minister, the representatives of the Central Electoral Commissions were gathered, because we didn't know on Thursday, 2 days before the voting, we didn't know where are the occupied territories. But in such conditions, it was difficult to trust the results. It doesn't matter who the candidate was and whatever the rating he has. So here, the principles, criteria, and the minimization of the human factor is important, because leadership lies in going to implement the right of the citizens when it is possible, not under the impact of emotions or the decision of central bodies. We have 1 more minute left for our discussion, but I have a very symbolical question sent from not controlled territory of Donetsk Oblast, from our Donetsk. I will ask it, and maybe some of the speakers is willing to answer it. And the question is the following: how will the elections take place in Donetsk, and when will it be possible? I think it's a rather rhetoric and symbolical question. So the representatives of the authority and the state, we will put all the efforts so that the residents of Donetsk, Luhansk, and all not controlled territories as soon as possible could select Ukrainian authority and could live in peaceful country. Thank you for such a patriotic summary. Thank you all for watching. Stay with us. We'll have a many more wonderful discussions and more top speakers. Thank you for joining for this discussion. But it is one of the most important questions for the residents of those communities where the elections didn't take place. Stay with us. Add your questions to the chat for the next panel discussion, so that the speakers could also voice your position, so the moderators could voice it and the speakers could answer it. So thank you for your attention.